Hey everybody, I am Cellist Johannes Moser and this is Living the Classical Life.
I'm Zsolt Bognár, host of Living the Classical Life. We're so glad you're joining us. Today we're speaking with cellist Johannes Moser, who one day received the invitation to perform with the Berlin Philharmonic for the first time. We discuss how he met this particular challenge. I hope you enjoy. Johannes, thank you so much for joining us here on the show. I know that you've just come from Vienna, so I really deeply appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, thank you.
So one of the things we like to explore on this show is the trajectory of one's musical life. I kind of avoided the word career because that makes it seem so pragmatic. But the realities are that we have a lot of young musicians who are viewing this, and they look up to you and your point of your musical life. And I'm thinking of a particularly favorite narrative where you've described that in 2011, your appearance with the Berlin Phil was a turning point. And what fascinated me about this story was that when you got the call 2 years before it, your first reaction was, I'm not ready.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that was really important for me to be aware of that early on, because I grew up with the recordings of the Berlin Phil. I grew up with sort of the spirit of Karajan hanging over the dinner table, you know, and just being in awe of this place. I studied in Berlin, of course, for I think 5 years, and I lived in Berlin for even longer than that. And I always went to the Berlin Phil and perceived it as the Holy Grail, and suddenly you get that call. And for me, psychologically, to have a call to go to a place where you feel your idols should be, you feel like that's not my place to be, you know? At least that's how I felt. Maybe there are some go-getters that don't have that feeling, but upon reflection, I felt very uncomfortable. And I decided to start working with a sports psychologist who would over and over help me visualize what it would be like to stand in front of that door and go into that hall with the orchestra there and Zubin Mehta behind me and 2,000 people watching, and the digital concert hall had just gained full steam, and so there was that pressure as well. And so basically what she did is we went through that event over and over again and just visualizing it, but not just from the point of the beginning of the performance, but from the point when I wake up after my afternoon nap, I take the cab, I leave the hotel, I go up the stairs that I know very well, and just really every step. And it was so bizarre. I mean, still my heart rate was up to 180, when it happened. But I felt I've been here so many times because I visualized it so many times.
Well, that's fascinating to me because I know that certainly wasn't the first time in your musical life that you had faced a high-pressure situation. I mean, you had the 2002 Tchaikovsky competition in which you were a medalist, and then in '05 you were working with Boulez in Chicago. So the 2011 juncture, was that different from the others? Didn't that give you some sort of reinforcement of some level of confidence, or does it not work that way?
Well, I think that's just part of my personal biography because, as you said, in 2002 I got a medal at the Tchaikovsky competition, and then since 2003 I had been sort of, getting one orchestra after the other, and for me it was very much a game. I mean, I did, I think, 30 conductor auditions. Like I went to conductors, played for them, and they invited me to their orchestras or where they were guesting. Thought, okay, now I have this orchestra and this person's music director. Where else does she or he conduct? So then I would go to that place, and it was very much like a game of Monopoly. And I felt by the end of the 2000s, so 2009, 2010, that it was not a game anymore, but actually it had become my life and my livelihood also. And because there was sort of an injection of seriousness in the whole pursuit, maybe I wasn't so easygoing about the whole thing anymore. But also, I mean, it was a huge situation of exposure. It was the 50th anniversary of Zubin Mehta coming to the Berlin Phil, and they repeated the first program that he did 50 years ago. This kind of thing. So, I mean, there was more to that engagement than just what was on paper, but there was that whole meta region of it that just added, I guess, pressure for me. But then after I went through that weekend, and I told my psychologist, I want to go through that weekend and I want to enjoy it. Like, I want to also do this for me. I don't just want to go through it and say, oh, I barely made it, but I made it. Yeah, I came out alive the other end. But I wanted to have an experience that I could carry with me and just say, okay, I also did this for me, and I actually, enjoyed purely that sound. I mean, if you are in that spot or soloist spot and the Berlin Phil is around you, I mean, it doesn't get better than that. You cannot recreate that sound in any other way.
Well, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating to me. Do you ever feel completely ready for the opportunities that you've been given? I mean, each situation is new. You might not feel worthy of it, but on the other hand, for general audiences of this show, we try to convey what it's like to have that experience. I'm sometimes criticized for talking too much about stage fright, but I don't think that stage fright is necessarily just about perception and approval from others. A lot of the pressure comes from ourselves, and whether or not on that given spot and occasion we can summon our best concentration, be well with ourselves, and somehow give our best performance reliably.
Yeah, I think after that preparatory work for that Berlin Phil concert, I think I said goodbye to the idea that I actually have to feel good on stage. And I felt that so much of my pursuit of feeling good on stage, or the fear of the lack of relaxation, just feeling uncomfortable on stage. Once I said, I'm fine with feeling uncomfortable, actually. I can just let discomfort sit here, and I can have joy sit on the other side, and let them be present, but not take control over me. That was the most important thing, because there are certain things we cannot control. Yeah, and to acknowledge that and to say, fine, I'm gonna give the best I can, but I'm not gonna be reliant on the chemical factory that is going on in my head, in my system. Yeah, and of course, I tell my students these kind of things. And then I find myself in those situations where I'm actually like, well, you've been a real smartass telling your students this. And now we're going to put it to the test if it actually works. And more often than not, it actually does. And that is nice. But I will say now that with COVID, I have so little performances and so little opportunity to actually try these things out. I find myself often at a point where I'm not in the flow, so I actually have to go through that process that maybe lesser experienced musicians have to go through. And so I feel this is also a great learning opportunity to confront myself again with what it's like to get yourself up to speed. And again, I think if you allow yourself not to care about feeling bad, because so often than not, and I don't know how you feel about this, but so often than not, I feel that I translate my discomfort as being a bad performance and my comfort that it is a good performance. Right. And then I listen to the archival recordings of each performance, and they're not that different. They're not as terrible as I thought when I was nervous, but they're also not as great as I thought they are when I feel fantastic about myself. And so I think I take comfort in the fact that there is a sort of a middle ground of reality, and that my personal feelings may differ from that vastly.
My question is, having been through that process with your sports psychologist, which in of itself is something fascinating, do you think that anyone else who struggles with the same issue can have some degree of success in going through that? How long did it take, by the way?
Naja, from the phone call that I had, the engagement to the concert was about 2 years. So I pretty much had 18 months for preparation until I realized that I can't do it by myself, and there is someone that can actually help me. Yeah? So I just had to come to terms with it. I think different methods work for different people. And I think we need to say goodbye to the idea that as a soloist or as a musician altogether, we are just lonesome riders. But we actually need to create a team. And if that team consists of agents and physiotherapists and psychologists, then that's a great version. If your team consists of friends, family, and great teaching support staff, then that is great too. But I think you need to say goodbye to the idea that you need to fix it all by yourself. Because every third-rate tennis player has like a team of 10 people around them. And why should we tackle it all by ourselves? There's no reason for it. And there is no merit in it. Because what counts is how you deliver at 8 p.m. That is the only thing that counts, right? And whatever you needed to make that work, then, do it.
Is the question of consistency on stage, which is always my fascination with my own striving for my best level, if we put it that way. How to work on consistency? Is it related to that process that you were talking about, going through it 100 times, testing yourself perhaps in other ways?
I have to confess that I'm not such a fan of the word consistency, because I think the best art happens away from consistency. It happens when you take a risk. So what I like to think of is that we all should come to the stage with a certain base of knowledge that is solid, and that is, you cannot destroy that, or it cannot be. You can't rock that boat, yeah. But it's actually solid, and then on top of that, you need to create what the evening brings to you in terms of inspiration, in terms of performative excitement. And I think just striving sort of for your for your best version that you had at home is not going to let you use the concert energy as a trampoline to, catapult you into stratosphere. I mean, if we look at, what is an exciting performer, I would say Janine Jansen. That is someone where I go and I'm like, maybe she's going to miss 2 notes, but all the other 90,000 notes that she's going to play is just going to, blow my socks off. And I think it is that willingness of risk-taking with a complete solid base that makes a great performer for me.
Yeah. So I want to explore just a little bit about your musical beginnings. My understanding is that you started your instrument at the age of 8, which was the age that I started piano.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And maybe by some standards that's a little bit on the later side. Maybe certain things, I have the feeling that maybe certain things would have been easier for me, but is there a correct age to start an instrument?
That's a good question. I mean, I started violin when I was 5.
Huh.
And then I had early music education when I was 2.5. And my parents are both musicians, so I mean, there was music always around. So I can't really say when I started my musical education, but certainly with the instrument or the materialization of music through cello, that happened when I was 8. I think if I had never heard of classical music and I would have started with cello at the age of 8, and I wouldn't have that sort of surrounding of classical music in my life, then probably it would have been a little bit late. But on the other hand, if you can't carry your instrument, with the exception of pianists, then I think you shouldn't do it.
But by the way, how did you wind up with the cello as opposed to the violin?
Well, violin was a good start. I actually remember going to the violin shop with my father, and I saw this violin hanging there as a 5-year-old, and I said, well, I have to have it. And little did I know that I actually have to practice it. So, I mean, that was a big shock. And it was awful. I mean, just the high frequencies, and it sounded like I was killing a cat on a daily basis. And then I said, okay, no more. I want to play soccer and be done with it. And then on one of the tours with my mother, who's a singer, one of the cellists approached me and said, hey, why don't you start playing the cello? It was actually one of the Gewandhaus cellists. It wasn't even my father that suggested it, but someone else. I said, that's a great idea. When we come back from tour, I want to play cello. And I started. And immediately when I sat down and I felt those low frequencies, I mean, as an 8-year-old, you don't really make decisions. But I mean, it was an intuitive feeling that I had that we belong together, and that it was a sort of a resonance and just a mutual, I don't know, understanding, or just a mutual resonance, I would say.
So I'm curious to delve just a little bit more into this work that you did with the sports psychologist, because it sounds like a process that I would benefit from. And what did that work? Was that a daily process? Did that involve a lot of effort on your part?
Well, obviously, I was touring at the time while I was doing the process. So, I mean, I couldn't go there, bi-weekly and just have a regular session. So we did a lot over Skype. I was going to say Zoom, but it was Skype.
Back in those days, it was Skype.
Back in those days, it was Skype. And it was a lot of phone conversations. And it was just a lot of normal conversations as well, just to get to know each other. But the way she described the process from her own life, from her own sport life, was that she compared it like going to the Olympics. So you train your life, and every 4 years, if you're lucky, maybe only once, you have the chance to go to such an event. And to think that all your work is focused on that very, very short time span of doing what you're doing. So let's say a 100-meter sprint, it's like now, 9.5 seconds. 50-meter swim. I mean, whatever. Just the fact that you've been training all your life for this, and it focuses in on such a narrow time frame, is putting such a lot of pressure on you that no matter if you're nervous or not, it will make you tight in some way. Yeah? And so our work was basically putting me in a meditative state and going through that process over and over again. Yeah? And Really, when I was standing in front of that door and Zubin Mehta, casually asked me, well, do you want to tune on stage or you want to take the A? Can we open the door a crack? So that, I was like, sure. Like, I've been there. It's still terribly exciting and terrifying in the best possible way, but I know what it's going to be like, and it turned out to be that way. And I mean, while I was going through the process, of course, I was performing over and over again. So I mean, performing in itself was not the issue. It was more to get that what I do anyways into a circumstance that I hadn't known before.
And so to sort of triple underline this for anyone tuned in and fascinated by what you went through, based on the feeling that you had going into that work, did you ever doubt that you could make progress with it?
Like with anything that is unfamiliar to you, I think I was a little bit skeptical. I was like, well, I'm a pro, so why would I need that? I had great education. I play, 80 concerts a year. What can she really tell me? And she could tell me a lot, and I needed to develop trust. And once I was able to give that trust and let her in my life, then it was possible. I think if you're sort of half-hearted and you're like, well, do I really need this? And then you build a barrier basically around yourself, right? Because you're trying to protect yourself also vulnerability. Because going through that process, you face some uncomfortable things, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, first of all, asking for help seems like a weakness, but actually it's a sign of strength. Right?
So we've been talking about expectations, process, the world of stage, and what you thought you knew going into the instrument at the age of 8. I mean, could you have pictured where you are now? Is that something that even entered into your mind? You've got the halls, the orchestras, the conductors.
Not at all.
Is that a surprise to you?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. My father played in the Bayerische Rundfunk here in Munich, the Bayerische Rundfunk Symphonieorchester, for 35 years. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to become an orchestra cellist. And it was not before I was successful in Moscow at the competition that I actually had a change of mind. And I was like, maybe we can just try this and, treat it as a game and see how far I get. And yeah, I'm still trying to find out how far I can get.
But, I'm really fascinated by that, if you're speaking specifically about the Tchaikovsky competition, because from what I understand, that experience was rather stressful for you.
Yeah, it was. It's not what it is today. Today, you stay in a 5-star hotel as a contestant. You have great catering. You have a team of people around you. You have the competition has the support of Mr. Gergiev. So I mean, it's really a very prestigious competition from the first round. When I was there, we were sent to the Moscow Conservatory to practice, and there was old grandma, and she handed out the keys, and she only spoke Russian, of course,
right,
for an international competition. And when she realized that I didn't understand her, she would just speak louder, hoping that or assuming that I was just like a little dim and wouldn't understand Russian. And after 2.5-3 weeks, I was anyways of a very light build, but I had lost almost 8 kilos. So I was down to 58 or 56, something like that.
It's actually pretty drastic.
That was drastic, and I think another week I probably would have had to go to the hospital. So it was the mixture of stress. We were in double rooms, so we were sharing rooms with other contestants. Obviously, they were also stressed out. And there was a sense of camaraderie, and it was a good group of people. I mean, I have no complaints, and also I have some Russian friends that were extremely kind to take us around. But still, you go there and, I had no expectation of winning or no expectation of going even to the final. Not at all. I didn't know. It was my first really big international competition. And you, of course, hear of those Russian machines that, are trained to be winners and all that.
Of course. But speaking about competitions, I think we have certain expectations about what it means to win a medal in a major competition like that. But it seems like your experience of that was not what people imagine in terms of the result. If you had any expectations.
Well, I mean, nothing happened after the competition. Yeah.
And that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. I mean, I thought, okay, here I have this medal now. Like, why isn't the phone ringing 24/7? And I decided that, I have this prize now, so let's do something with it. And that's when I started the conductor auditions. That's when I started taking matters into my own hands. And in a way, those auditions were really my prize. Yeah, those auditions were also what kickstarted my career. Yeah, and I wonder if that is still the same today. I would imagine so, because in a world where we're going more and more digital and where we're going more and more impersonal, like an email or a text instead of a phone call instead of a meeting, or let's say a Zoom instead of a meeting, or face-to-face meeting. And it's really the personal connections that make the difference. Yeah. I'm not even sure if at the time, the early 2000s, if I was really the best cellist around. I don't think so. But I was the cellist that those conductors knew, because I was, and I guess I was good enough, and they hired me after the auditions. But yeah, I mean, after the competition, if it would have been today, of course, it would be very vastly different, because nowadays you have Gergiev that takes the winners around and shops them around, and you immediately have a whole cachet of concerts. And maybe it's good that for me it was a little bit of a slow start after that, because I had to grow into the idea to do what I did, because I did not grow up with that expectation, and that expectation of exposure also, right? And I think what I did regain in the last 10 years, let's say, after the Berlin incident, shall we call it?
Yeah.
Was that I think I was able to have some playfulness in the whole thing again. Yeah, how I started off, and not to take it too serious, because in the end, I mean, it's an insanity in itself. I mean, you have a room of 2,500 people listening to sound waves coming at them quietly, all staring in the same direction, with somebody doing interpretive dance next to you. And you're like, what are we actually doing here? And it still holds so much magic. But I think that magic can be taken out of the whole equation if you take it too serious and too much matter of fact.
So for young musicians who are listening to this, for example, I didn't really know that making a circuit of conductor auditions was a thing. I mean, yes, you know that you can meet a conductor, but you did that a lot. I'm sure that these conductors get inundated with requests on the one hand, but how likely is that going to translate to success?
Well, it depends how much of a connection you're able to make in those 2.5 minutes, right?
2.5 minutes?
Well, sometimes.
That's astonishing.
With Franz Welser Möst, I played the beginning of the Dvorak concerto. After the first 2 pages, he said, great, yeah, I'll have you in Blossom. And I came. Some people took more time, like Zubin Mehta, it was like a half hour. Yeah, he asked me for specific things of Rococo variations, specific things of Dvorak, specific things of Schumann. And that was, I think, in 2004, 2003. And then I performed with him at the LA Phil, and then Schumann in Berlin. So he was very generous in that way. You never know how these things are going to go. I think I came from the mindset of the singer's world because of my mother. And for singers, it's normal to do auditions, even at the late stage of their career. So you always you always audition for a role, you always audition for a conductor, you always audition to be part of a house, So, yeah, I guess conductors get a lot of requests. You need someone to put you forward. And I think if you study in a city X and then you try to befriend the orchestra manager or try to strike a deal, and you say, please, if a conductor comes through, can you arrange that I can perform for them? Or can you suggest it? Yeah. Then of course you need to reserve a hall, you need to reserve a pianist, there's a piano, and all those things. But you can't just write a letter. That's not going to work. It also doesn't work for agencies, by the way. Like if you want to be signed by an agency, don't send CDs and don't send a letter. Get someone to suggest you.
What's your approach to having these types of conversations, if at all, with your students? Are you the type of teacher who focuses purely on the music and they figure that out for themselves by on their own time, or are these things that young musicians need to be aware of? Tricky question.
I'm for it and I'm against it.
Right.
And so I'm for it in the sense that how should people know when they're not coming from a musical background? I mean, they need some sort of guidance and some sort of introduction to, how to write an invoice or how to, behave at a post-concert dinner. Some young musicians don't even go to post-concert dinners. For sure, they're not going to get invited back because at the post-concert dinners, you meet the donors and you meet the people that actually pay for the whole evening. So why would you skip on that? I mean, that's part of your job. And, that's not even an option. It's part of your contract. Yeah. But I'm also against having those conversations because I teach music and I think there is a gazillion ways to how to live a life. So usually I get approached and they ask, well, how do I do this? How do I do that? And I'm very happy to give that information that I can give. I mean, not all information that I have is actually applicable for other people. But I know a lot of young musicians with whom I studied, or at the same time, that studied at the same time that I did, that went into consulting. They now work for McKinsey. They're having a great time. Yeah, I know a lot of musicians that then went into architecture, or they went into photography, or you name it. Music, first of all, I think is a study about your own confrontation with sound. Yeah, and your own confrontation also with yourself in a way. Yeah, I think besides the study of philosophy, it's probably the most personal conversation that you can have with yourself. And so it's never lost to study music. I mean, people say, oh, I'm a dropout. I wasted 4 times of music. No, you didn't waste a second. Because I think studying music really is more than just trying to, get some sort of level of virtuosity with an instrument. But actually, you are confronting the big demon, which is like, what do I do? Yeah, what do I do and what do I want to express? Well, what do I want to express? Who am I? And then you very quickly come to the big questions if you are willing to do that.
In concluding, I'd love to ask you, what is inspiring you these days in life in general?
Mm-hmm. So my COVID project was to take on yoga. And I'm hugely inflexible because I'm a runner. So,
yes. Those things don't usually...
I'm still hoping for a little bit of flexibility. My downward dog is not nearly there yet where I want it to be, but I think I'll get there eventually. But I think what inspires me, first of all, is going out into nature. I had the fortune, I was very fortunate to go diving 2 years ago at the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. And, seeing that or going into the mountains or going into a great forest just puts things into perspective. And I think inspiration is one thing, but having perspective is the other. So I think that is very important. And then what other things that inspire me is that hopefully we can go to galleries and museums and theater soon again. I moved to Vienna primarily because of the theater. So I'm a big theater fan. I love the Burgtheater, the Akademietheater. And before the first lockdown in January, I was, I think, 7 times in the theater that month alone because I'm just so fascinated by this creation that now is 3,500 years old, stemming from the Greek theater. So that you have a person in the middle and you have a choir around, and then you have a bunch of people listening. What is happening there? And that also inspires me for my pursuit of music. It's like, what is actually happening? Am I really just playing sound and people are like, bouncing to it? Or is there more of an unspeakable magic going on that is just indescribable? And that's, I think, where my theater fascination comes from, is that when the curtain lifts, what is happening? And it remains a mystery. And I'm happy for it to remain a mystery, but I want to be part of it.
Johannes, thank you so much for joining me, for joining us on the show, and sharing these insights into your incredible life. And we wish you much continued health and safety and fulfillment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.